This is the Mungen Dungeon podcast. I'm Mungen Dester, and today we're going to be talking a little bit about world building in TTRPGs like Dungeons and Dragons. Now, obviously, world building is hugely important if you're a dungeon master, because it enhances the immersion and the storytelling aspect of D&D, and it gives you tools and things to sort of springboard off of, and it creates a consistent and believable world for your players to explore. So, how do you do it? How do you world build? What's the world building process look like? Now, for everyone, it's different, and everyone comes at it from different directions and with different styles. But fundamentally, especially in a TTRPG game, it consists of always the same pieces, which are just drawn together differently. So of those pieces, obviously, you have to have a consistent and believable world. So in order to achieve that, whether or not you want to do an outer space world full of aliens and different planets and light travel and something like you take, because world building in TTRPGs is no different than world building in a TV show or a movie or an amusement park. And I really think of it like, I think of DMing more like an amusement park than any of those other things, right? Because you're not telling a story. You are letting the players have a story through you, right? So, which I think is sort of something that, needs to be said again. You're letting the players have a story through you. So they're the driving force. They're the protagonist, like in an amusement park. The person walking down the aisle, you don't know if they're going to go left or right or north or south or what's going to happen or what order they're going to take the rides in. And when you're looking at an experience like Harry Potter Land, right, which I think is like Universal. Went there with my girlfriend a while back, and what I noticed was it's like it didn't matter which way I went. They had thought of everything. They had everything planned out. They had the world built in such a way that I couldn't go to the bathroom without being confronted by Harry Potter. Which, looking over the side of the urinal at me. So you're not building guide rails for the players, but you're building a sandbox for them to run around in. So what you're going to need to flesh out, like how much is too much world building? Because if you build too much, you end up, now you're in a freaking box, right? I've world built you into a dungeon where you have no other way out, because if you don't go the way I wanted, you have to think like a game designer. You have to have systems in place that are designed to handle improbability. That's why in all my adventures and stuff, I added a bunch of just random tables. It's just like, here's a hunting table, here's a fishing table. If they go this way, the road has an encounter table, the forest has an encounter table. There's 6 encounter tables here. You're probably not going to use but one of them in the actual game that you play. But the game before it's played exists in a sort of a superposition where you're, if you're going to be dungeon mastering, you have to anticipate left and right. It has to be north and south. You have to have the players do this and that, zig and zag. And if you don't plan out for that, you end up getting into this whole, he's steamrolling us, he's leading us by the nose and railroading, blah, 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 blah. Railroading is just one of these things that just kills me. It's like railroading is always just actually just a disagreement between a dungeon master and a player. The dungeon master wants something, the player wants something else. Half the time they'll say, you're railroading. And you're like, no, I'm trying to have a coherent story while you are trying to, make a freaking form an indie circus in Waterdeep and just like live there now. And I'm trying to get you, this guy killed your father and, you're on a chase after him and you've been ignoring it for 4 sessions now. Come on. I'm not railroading you. You're ignoring the plot. And then the But then, the counter argument to that is, why isn't the plot that we have in Indie Circus, if that's the game the players obviously want to play? Now, that's when you have a storyline-driven game. If you do your world building right, then you'll be able to have the players have their Indie Circus, do all their stuff, but then the state of the world around them will be such as they're gonna, I don't know how to say it. The world building is good enough, and you have your story kind of looped into all your world builds. They're going to be like, oh, there's always constant reminders of the main plot. Oh, your uncle, who's the Duke, his face is plastered up, and as you're putting up flyers for your Indie Circus, you just see the face of the man that killed your father. You gotta be. It's a weird combination of being flexible and being rigid. I just would have ran. I just went totally off the topic, but like I'm saying, things you need to build in your world. You have to have memorable locations. You have to have interesting NPCs. You have to have, that's the fundamentals of world building. You have to have a past and a future. And that's what you got to think about. A past and a future for all of this. You have to have NPCs. Your NPCs have a past. You have to have memorable locations. Those locations have a past. If the players encounter an ancient ruin in the forest, such a cliche, Dungeons and Dragons cliche. You encounter an ancient ruin in the forest. What then, right? Like, where did this ruin come from? Why is it lost? Why isn't anyone using it anymore? Is the land bad? Is the area bad? Is it because it's a bad forest? Why was it abandoned? Did they die? Did the people just convert to a different religion and fuck this? Were they killed in a war? Who are these people? Why is it ancient? What kind of traps would they lay and why? And you don't have to write out the whole dungeon, if it's like, oh, the players ran off into the forest. Well, my world building is such that the history of this place is there was once, an ancient empire here that fell a long time ago, and there was a dark age, and these are the ancestors of those people, or these are the descendants of those people who are now, sort of rediscovering their ancient technology. What a great storyline. So when they say, oh, we got this random ancient temple. Oh, you're fighting an ancient temple. We need to have a little dungeon run. All right, well, you already know, okay, this ancient temple is, because of my world building, I know it's from this past civilization that crumbled and had a dark age. I know that people are trying to discover the information. Maybe I'll put some information in there. Maybe there's some hieroglyphs on the walls that talk about the golden age, and I can seed a little in there, and it just adds this whole other element of stuff to your game, tools you can use that help you world build. It's like the macro and the micro are the same. It's fractal. You build your world in such a way that it is sort of fractal. It's like, oh, what's the major storyline? Oh, there's a battle against good and evil, right? There's a lich. He's trying to destroy the world because he's crazy and he's a lich. Perfect story. Classic D&D story. You don't have to over elaborate. It's Dungeons and Dragons, right? They don't all have to be Critical Role. There's an evil wizard. He wants to kill the world. The heroes do not want the world to be destroyed, and they know about what the lich is doing. And for some reason, they're the ones that have to stop him, right? Those are your basic, plot components of any good story. Now, that's the macro story. And then you're like, okay, well, I'm going to world build this story. Okay, I'm going to world build this conflict. That's the main plot, but I got to build a world behind it, right? Now, are you going to build a world and then add a plot? Sometimes people do that, but rarely. Honestly, for most storytelling, the plot comes before the location. They add in and then here's the backdrop. But really, it's a battle between good and evil with the backdrop of a D&D game. It's not, so to stay on point, you are going to world build out a cradle for that plot, right? So the macro and the micro, like I said. So the premise is battle of good and evil. Within the world, it's like, okay, how has that affected the world? How is the world a battle between good and evil? Is it a battle between the industry and nature and the elves, like Avatar? right? Or is it going to be like a battle of good and evil, like Lord of the Rings, and there's a country that's billowing smoke and darkness and evil orcs and stuff all come from there? Or is it going to be how's it going to be? But that, like, you see how the world building in Tolkien is the plot, right? The orcs live over there. The good guys live over here. The ancient history, all about the ring. The world building is the plot. It becomes the plot because the characters are just reacting to the world build, or acting in it as they're trying to be proactive and destroy the ring. But Lord of the Rings, man, great stuff. But anywho, the world building as an abstract. I'm not just telling you like, oh, you got to set up a bunch of towns, you got to set up a bunch of forests here and this and that there. But it's like, no, take it to the deeper level, right? You're building a world that is meant to be a reflection of the story of your campaign. So, take that advice, take it with a grain of salt, though. I mean, I don't know. What do I know? But you also have to realize that when you do that, when you try to make your world building about the story, not just super locked in, like, I wrote every language of every different tribe of frog people. You want to have more of an open scenario where it's like you can allow the players to input into the world build. So you can, you don't want to have the world so locked in that when you ask Jebediah the Robe and you're like, what town are you from? And he's like, I said I was from a small fishing village and I, used to hang out in the forest and sometimes I would go down to the river and play smooth jazz on my saxophone. Just if you don't want to have to tell that guy, there's no fishing villages in this town that are near a forest or a stream, so you're going to have to change that and make it from this other place. He's like, but I took a sailor for a background. And you're like, nah, you're not cool. You have to take something else, make them rewrite your character. You don't want to have to do that. You want to be able to be like, okay, yeah, what's the name of the town? Fraggleton. You're from Fraggleton on the west coast of Flargentia. And you have a fishing village. Good to go, right? You want to be able to do that. You want to be able to make that change on the fly to get that input from the players. Because it adds so much more to it, right? Like, I had a great experience in a game where there was this guy I was playing with, in a party, of course, but his character had a noble background, and he role-played it up. I mean, he role-played into every game. What are these peasants doing in this? But he was a druid, so it was all even funnier. What are these peasants doing? What is this? What is that? Making a big old hoot and holler about how rich he was and everything. And then they ended up going to Waterdeep, and I'm like, oh, by the way, your brother and your parents are all disappointed in you. And I made him meet his family, and I created this whole family on the fly based on his character and made him like lords of Waterdeep, made his brother the captain of the guard and all this other stuff. And if I had world built into it too much, that wouldn't have been possible, right? So you got to think about that. It's like you don't want to overdo it because you want to let the players fill in the gaps. It's like it's like a magnifying glass around the party where you're world building around them. My favorite world building strategy is to let the players just start with one town. Let the players just start with one town, and then they can build up. As they travel, you build where they're going, right? So you let the players start their own town, and then you say, where are you? You're all from the same town. Tell me about this town. You guys get together. Tell me what the town is. It's a small town. That's your only stipulation. And they'll give you the town. You draw a map of it. Say, okay, this is where the mission starts. Now I'm going to, start dungeon mastering you, and blah, 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 blah. The village is attacked by orcs or something. Level 1 type threat, right? I'm not introducing the big bad guy yet. Just level 1 level threat. You get a band of orcs storming into your town. You guys just got to level 1. You got to level 1 chopping wood and fighting boars in the forest. But some orcs attack. You grab your woodsman's axe, go to town, right? And then after the session, you're like, okay, so what are your character's thoughts or feelings? Where are you going next? What is the next thing you're going to do? And they'll say, We wanted to go fight the goblins. We wanted to go back and find their camp, might say one party. Another party might say, well, we got rid of those goblins. We're going to start building walls, building defenses, stuff, right? So then I got these 2 world building opportunities now for the next session. Either A, I'm going to go design a goblin camp. The goblin camp is across a field that now appears, that exists. There's forests around it because I don't want it to be too open yet. You know, they live in a little forest. They're isolated from the rest of the world because of some mountain range. Now there's mountains around the forest, and it's like a little sliver of valley in a forest. That's where their village is. Yeah, and there's a pass. That's the only way people get into it. So the goblins live over here along the edge of the mountains. And maybe the goblins have their own underground tunnel that leads to the other side the players could discover. Ooh, maybe that's what it is. So boom, there's one world build. Now, boom, off of the first session. The second one is, I'm like, they want to stay in the town and start building barricades. All right, so they stay in the town, they start putting up barricades. And so as they're building all these barricades and stuff, a convoy comes from the next town over. And maybe they don't live in a valley in the mountains. Now they live somewhere where there's other towns because the convoy's coming in saying, hey, you're building these walls around your town, but that's actually against the law because this emperor says you can't build walls unless it's like blah, 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 because you might stop his army. And then it's like, oh, shit. So now I got to deal with this diplomacy strategy thing. There's an emperor now. Where's he from? Oh, okay, I'm part of an empire. All right, so now there's like a bunch of towns. I'm an emperor. I'm an imperial. And it's like, boom, whole other world, whole other story, whole other everything based on this one player choice. So that's what I'm saying. You got to let the players come up with ideas, and you got to be able to build the world backwards around it. Now, I realize that's like the opposite of world building, right? So it's like, what am I going to build then? What am I going to build? All right, so here's how I like to do. Start with a town. It's not what do you build, it's when do you build. You start with a town, you get the players in, you get the first couple sessions, and now you're starting to get all these details. You're like, oh, okay, cool. Now, session 2, you're like, all right, so you're handling this session now, you're handling this stuff, you go fight the goblins, you beat the goblins, you come out on the other side of the valley. What's on the other side of the valley? I got to make up some more stuff. You do that for, 2 to 5 sessions. You go all the way to 5, and you have tons of stuff. Right? And you've taken notes. You got all this stuff written down, all these different random little bits and pieces and bobs and bits. And you take that, and then you world build from that, boom, to the world map. And that's when you flesh out the world. When you already know what the players are like, you know what's going on, you know what story you're going to have, and you want to introduce the big bad villain. You introduce the big bad villain at the same time as you show the players, hey, here's the actual world map. You guys have finally made it out of your little podunk town. You're level 5. You finally have a map of the whole known world, which is hard to come by. They're like, wow, and what a moment of awe. You haven't been boring your players the whole time, telling them all about the outside world. You've been acting as though you knew everything about the outside world, and the players were just in the dark, and they were discovering it as they went because they haven't seen this like map and stuff yet. And then when it finally reveals itself to them, it's so awesome because now they have all this knowledge, and they're like, yes, I wanted to know all this stuff about the empire for their character, but also like their character is learning it and the player is learning it. And they're like, whoa, this world is based on me. The world is showing me what I wanted to find. So it's tailor-made. That's the beauty of D&D world build, that you can't do that in a movie. You can't do that in anything like that, but you can do it kind of in an amusement park, right? Because they have a theme. They have a theme, and then the adventure is yours, right? So that's kind of the advice, Let the players generate the world by what they need for the story they want to hear. So you generate the world that the players need for the story they want you to tell them, not based on just whatever convoluted process you're using to try to decide what government runs, what tiny thwarp, and I mean, there's different schools of thought on world building. I can't say Tolkien was like a failure at world building. He was great at it, but he did exactly what I'm kind of telling you not to do. I think that you let it grow organically rather than try to push it out, and I believe that's probably what Tolkien did. as he played his little mind games with himself, you know. Anyway, that's the Mungen in the Dungeon podcast for today. Thank you guys for listening. I'm Mungen Daster. If you like this, go check out my Patreon or check out some of my maps on Dungeon Masters Guild. Over and out.